Hey guys, tonight we're following a medieval messenger through the stone-cold reality of sleeping in castles that were built for war, not comfort. Picture this. You're riding through a January blizzard in 1342, your horse's breath turning to ice crystals mid-air, and tucked inside your leather satchel are letters sealed with the kind of wax that means someone important will be very angry if you freeze to death before delivering them. The castle gates loom ahead, those massive oak doors bound with iron that creak like a dying giant, and you realize with a sinking feeling that finding shelter and surviving the night are two completely different achievements. You've been riding for 9 hours, your wool cloak is soaked through, which means it's now basically a wearable ice sheet. Your fingers haven't had feeling since you crossed that last river, and the castle guards eyeing you from above, they're wondering if you're worth the firewood. Here's the thing, nobody tells you about medieval castles. They were essentially vertical refrigerators designed to withstand sieges, not provide cozy sleepover accommodations for travelling workers. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from and what time it is there. I love seeing this community span the globe. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You dismount in the outer bailey, that's the courtyard area between the outer and inner walls, and immediately a stable boy who looks about 12 years old and far too competent for his age grabs your horse's reins. He doesn't ask your name. He's already assessing your gear with the practiced eye of someone who's seen 1,000 travellers and knows exactly which one's tip. Your horse gets led away to warmth and hay while you stand there dripping, clutching your message pouch like it's the only thing keeping you from being tossed back into the snow. A sergeant-at-arms approaches middle-aged scarred across one cheek, the kind of guy who's forgotten more about violence than you'll ever learn and demands to see your letters. This is the first test. You don't hand them over, you show him the seal. If it's from someone sufficiently important, a bishop, a duke, someone whose anger could end careers. His expression shifts from suspicious to merely cautious. If it's from a minor lord or, God forbid, a merchant, you've just been downgraded in the castle's mental hierarchy to somewhere between stray dog and possibly useful idiot. The seal in your case tonight is decent a baron with connections to the king's cousin. The sergeant nods, which is medieval for you probably won't be sleeping in a ditch. But it's not a guarantee of warmth, just a guarantee of being inside walls. He gestures toward the inner keep, that central tower that's basically a fortress within the fortress, and tells you someone will see to you. This is wonderfully vague. See to you could mean a spot near the Great Hall's fire, or it could mean a pile of straw in a corner, where the wind screams through gaps in the masonry. You follow another servant, this one older moving with that efficient shuffle of someone who's spent decades navigating these stone corridors in the dark. The temperature drops noticeably as you enter the building. Outside was cold. Inside is somehow colder because at least outside the wind kept moving. Here the cold just sits patient and heavy, waiting in every shadow. Your boots echo on flagstones worn smooth by 2 centuries of feet. Torches flicker in wall sconces, but their light barely dents the darkness, and their heat is a joke. You'd get more warmth from an angry glance. You pass the Great Hall's entrance and catch a glimpse of the evening scene nobles at the high table, knights and household officers at lower tables, servants moving like ghosts between them, and at the room's far end the massive fireplace that's pumping heat upward toward the rafters where it does absolutely no good for anyone human. The hall's occupants look flushed, almost sweaty in their furs and velvets, which tells you that standing near that fire is like standing near the sun, glorious, for the chosen few irrelevant to everyone else. The servant leads you past the hall. Of course, you're not eating with the household tonight. You arrived too late, and besides, your seal wasn't quite impressive enough. He takes you up a spiral staircase. These things are deliberately narrow and turn clockwise so defenders can swing swords freely, while attackers coming up are hindered, and your calves burn because you've already ridden all day, and now you're climbing what feels like a medieval stairmaster, designed by someone who hated happiness. Finally, you emerge onto the second level where the corridor is somehow even darker and colder than below. This is where the castle stores its less important guests. The servant opens a door, more of a heavy wooden slab on iron hinges, and reveals your accommodation. It's a chamber, technically, about 8 feet by 10 feet. Stone walls, stone floor, one narrow window with wooden shutters that are closed but still let in drafts you could sail a ship with. There's a pallet on the floor, a cloth bag stuffed with straw, one thin woolen blanket that's been used by approximately 800 previous travellers and never washed, and a small brazier in the corner that currently contains ashes and optimism. The servant says someone will bring coals soon, which in medieval castle time could mean anything from 10 minutes to never. Then he leaves, and you hear his footsteps fade down the corridor, and you're alone with the cold. You set down your message pouch carefully, because if those letters get damaged, you're not just unemployed, you're possibly dead, depending on what they say. And who's angry about delays? Then you stand there dripping and shivering and face tonight's central question: how exactly do you survive until morning without becoming a cautionary tale? Other messengers whisper about in taverns. The castle around you is breathing not metaphorically, but actually moving air in ways that seem designed to find every gap in your clothing and exploit it. Medieval fortresses operated on thermal principles that their builders understood instinctively, but never wrote down, probably because if they had, someone might have questioned why they were constructing buildings that actively fought against human survival. Heat rises, obviously, which means the Great Hall's massive fireplace is essentially heating the sky. The warmth generated by that roaring hearth goes straight up to the timber roof beams, 40 feet overhead, where it pools uselessly before escaping through the smoke louvers, those gaps in the roof designed to vent smoke, but which also vent every calorie of precious heat. You're currently on the second floor, which in the castle's thermal geography is the worst possible location. Ground level has the kitchens, which stay relatively warm from constant cooking fires, and the body heat of servants who work there around the clock. The Great Hall, also ground level, has that massive fireplace and the combined warmth of dozens of bodies, nobles, knights, servants, dogs, all breathing, eating, generating heat through the simple act of being alive in close proximity. The upper floors, where private chambers exist for the Lord's family and important guests, sometimes have their own smaller fireplaces or braziers that actually get maintained. But your floor, the middle floor, this is where the castle stores rooms. It doesn't care about chambers for minor guests, storage areas, occasionally a chapel that sees use 3 times a year. The heat from below never quite reaches you, and there's nothing above to trap it anyway. The walls themselves are your enemy tonight. They're limestone blocks, each weighing several hundred pounds, cut and fitted with medieval precision, which means close enough that it mostly doesn't fall down. In summer, these thick stone walls are actually an advantage. They absorb heat slowly during the day and keep interiors cool. But in January, they've been cold for months. They've absorbed winter into their very molecules. You could put your hand against the wall right now, and it would feel like touching a glacier. Actually, let's say you do. Press your palm flat against the stone. Within 5 seconds, the cold conducts through your skin, and you yank your hand back because it's actively painful. The wall just stole heat from your body and gave you nothing in return except the reminder that stone remembers winter better than it ever remembers summer. Historians still argue whether medieval people understood thermodynamics in any formal sense, but they absolutely understood that stone plus winter equals suffering. Chronicles from the period are full of passing references to the Great Cold and nobles dying in their beds, though cause of death usually gets listed as something vague like a sudden illness, because admitting that your fancy castle couldn't keep a duke from freezing in his sleep sounded embarrassing. The problem was that castles served military functions first, and habitability functions maybe fourth after storage and intimidation. Those narrow windows you see. They're arrow slits designed for defenders to shoot through while presenting minimal target area. The fact that they also let in wind and precipitation was just an accepted side effect of not getting conquered. Your chamber's single window is shuttered now, but the shutters are wooden planks that fit into the window frame with what we'll charitably call medieval tolerance levels. You can see actual daylight, snowlight coming through gaps around the edges. More importantly, you can feel the draft. It's not a gentle breeze, it's a focused stream of Arctic air that's found the path of least resistance and is now systematically exploring your room like a predator. The draft hits the floor, spreads out circles around, looking for heat to steal, finds none, and exits through the gap under your door. This creates a convection current that's constantly cycling cold air through your space. You're essentially sleeping in a wind tunnel that happens to have walls. The ceiling doesn't help. Look up, those are timber boards, probably oak laid across supporting beams. They're maybe an inch thick, and above them is either another floor or the roof structure. Either way, there's no insulation in the modern sense. If you're lucky, there might be some packed earth or rubble filled between floors to deaden sound, but it's not stopping cold. And if your ceiling happens to be directly below the roof, congratulations, you're separated from the January night sky by exactly one layer of timber and some clay tiles. Any heat that manages to reach ceiling height is immediately conducted away to the great outdoors, which doesn't need it because the outdoors is already winning the temperature war. Here's something that won't help you sleep better. The castle probably has ice forming inside it right now. Not in your room maybe, but in corners and forgotten chambers and along certain wall sections where condensation from kitchen steam or human breath has been rising, cooling and freezing. Some castles in particularly brutal winters would develop actual icicles hanging from interior corridors. There's an account, possibly apocryphal but honestly believable, of a French castle in 1234 where the chapel's holy water font froze solid and the priest had to chisel out chunks to perform baptisms. When your building is so cold that water freezes inside it, you have to question whether shelter is even the right word. It's more like being inside a very large, very expensive cooler. The brazier in your corner mocks you with its potential. It's basically an iron bowl on legs designed to hold hot coals that radiate heat. When it's working, it can actually make a difference in a small room like this, not warmth exactly, but something better than nothing. The problem is getting it lit and keeping it fed. Coal or charcoal burns slowly and produces decent heat, but it also produces carbon monoxide, which in an enclosed space can kill you just as dead as freezing can, only less photogenically. So you need ventilation, but all your ventilation is currently letting in the cold you're trying to escape. It's a perfect catch-22, die warm and poisoned, or survive cold and miserable. You're also realizing that the stone floor under your feet is conducting heat away from your body faster than you can generate it. Standing still is actively dangerous right now. Your boots help, but medieval leather boots with cloth wrappings aren't exactly thermal barriers. The cold is creeping up through your soles into your feet, making your toes ache with that deep penetrating pain that means your body is prioritizing core temperature over extremities. This is the same floor you're expected to sleep on, separated from the stone by only that sad straw pallet, and a blanket that looks like it lost a fight with a moth colony. The castle's architect, whoever he was, probably slept in a nice manor house in the countryside where fireplaces worked properly and rooms were sized for heating. He designed this fortress to withstand armies not winter, and right now, you're feeling the difference. You're in a machine built for war, and that machine sees you as just another piece of soft matter that needs to not die before morning, but only just barely. The servant who showed you to this room vanished so quickly, you're starting to wonder if he was real or just a cold-induced hallucination. You're standing in your chamber, shivering, facing the immediate reality that nobody's coming back anytime soon, with those promised coals, and your fate for tonight is being decided right now by people who don't know your name and wouldn't care if they did. Medieval castles operated on rigid hierarchies that determined everything from where you sat at dinner to whether you froze to death in your sleep, and the gatekeeper, that porter you met when you first arrived, is currently the most important person in your universe. He's down in his lodge right now, probably warming his hands over a small fire, reviewing the mental notes he made when you rode in. Your horse's condition decent, not great. Your clothing wool, some leather, no fur, which marks you as working class, trying to look professional. Your seal legitimate, but not spectacular. The paper quality of your letters good vellum, which means your employer has money but isn't nobility. And most crucially, your accent and bearing when you spoke. Did you sound educated, desperate, arrogant? Because all of these factors are feeding into an algorithm that's running in the porter's head right now, and the output of that algorithm determines whether someone's going to bring you coal, bring you food, bring you anything, or just let you figure it out yourself. This isn't cruelty exactly, it's resource management in a world where everything is scarce and everyone's trying to survive. The castle has maybe 300 people in it right now, the lord's family, household knights, permanent servants, visiting nobles, soldiers, craftsmen, and random travellers like you. There are perhaps 20 fireplaces and braziers total, and feeding all of them requires a staggering amount of fuel. Wood doesn't just appear, it has to be cut, dried, transported, and stored. Charcoal has to be made in specialized pits by people who know the technique. Every piece of coal that goes into your brazier is coal that isn't going to the lord's chamber, the lady's solar, the knight's quarters, or the kitchen, so the porter's weighing your importance against everyone else's, and let's be honest, you're losing that calculation. But here's where medieval politics gets interesting. The porter doesn't know what's in your letters. They could be routine business, grain prices, requests for more men-at-arms, boring administrative nonsense. Or they could be urgent intelligence about troop movements, political alliances, scandals, threats. The seal suggests someone important sent them, but not how important the contents are. So the porter's in a bind. If he ignores you and you turn out to be carrying crucial information that gets delayed because you froze to death, he's going to have a very bad conversation with his lord. But if he wastes resources on you, and you're just some messenger carrying mundane documents, he looks foolish for not managing the household better. Most porters solve this dilemma by doing the bare minimum. They'll send someone up eventually with a small bucket of coals, enough to take the edge off the cold, but not enough to make you comfortable. They'll maybe authorize some bread and ale from the kitchen, but not a hot meal. They're betting that you'll survive, deliver your letters in the morning and leave, and nobody will have to think about you again. It's the medieval equivalent of giving someone just enough customer service that they can't legitimately complain, but not so much that you've wasted effort. And honestly, it usually works. Messengers are tough by necessity. You don't take this job if you're precious about comfort. Right now you're calculating whether to wait in your room or go exploring. Waiting is safer politically. You've been assigned this space, and wandering around a castle at night without an escort can get you accused of spying, stealing, or worse. Medieval castles were paranoid places where everyone suspected everyone else of plots, and a stranger found lurking near the lord's chambers or the treasury could end up in the dungeon with very few questions asked. On the other hand, waiting in this freezing room is a good way to guarantee you'll be too cold to sleep, and tomorrow you need to be functional enough to ride another 30 miles through snow. You decide to compromise. You'll go down to the great hall not to intrude on the nobles, but to hover near the entrance, where servants gather, where you might catch someone's attention and remind them that you exist and could use those coals that were promised. This is a delicate social dance. You can't demand anything because you have no authority here. You can't beg because that's pathetic, and medieval people respected strength more than suffering. You have to project, I'm important enough to matter, but not so important that I'm threatening, which is basically the entire skill set of being a successful messenger. You make your way back down that spiral staircase, moving carefully, because the steps are worn smooth and slightly uneven, and breaking your neck on castle stairs is such a common cause of death that most chroniclers don't even bother recording it anymore. The Great Hall is louder now, dinner's winding down, which means people are drinking more and talking louder, and there's that particular roar of dozens of conversations mixing with dog barks and the clatter of wooden plates and the pop of green wood burning in the fireplace. You position yourself just outside the main entrance in the corridor where you can be seen but aren't intruding. A servant girl, maybe 16, carrying a heavy pitcher of ale, spots you and pauses. She's got that look that medieval servants develop, where they're simultaneously exhausted and hyper-aware, always tracking who needs what and who might cause problems. You give her your best, I'm harmless and also pathetic expression, and ask if anyone's bringing those coals up to the second floor. She sighs, which is never a good sign, and tells you the fuel stores are running low because the woodcutters couldn't work for 3 days during the last storm, and the steward's being careful about distribution. Careful is code for cheap, or possibly realistic about impending shortages, but either way it means you're not getting coals anytime soon. She takes pity on you. Maybe you remind her of her brother, or maybe she's just a decent human being which still existed even in the Middle Ages despite what some people think. She tells you that if you go to the kitchen and ask for Marjorie, mention that Agnes sent you. Marjorie might let you sit near the ovens for a while to warm up before you sleep. This is gold. Kitchen access isn't guaranteed for random messengers, but if you can get in and build some goodwill with the cooking staff, you might survive this night with all your toes intact. You thank Agnes profusely, overdoing it. Would be weird, but genuine gratitude is always appropriate, and she hurries off because standing still in a medieval castle in winter is something only idiots and nobles can afford. You head toward the kitchens, following your nose more than any clear directions, because kitchens in castles are always identifiable by smell: wood smoke roasting meat, onions, that slightly sour smell of ale brewing, and underneath it all the medieval aroma of too many people living in close quarters with insufficient bathing. It's not pleasant exactly, but it smells like warmth and food and life, which right now is everything you need. Your clothes are trying to kill you, not metaphorically, but through actual thermal physics that medieval people understood through brutal experience, even if they couldn't explain it in scientific terms. You're still wearing everything you rode in with the linen shirt against your skin, a wool tunic over that wool hose tied up with leather straps, a leather jerkin that's supposed to block wind, and over it all that heavy wool cloak that's been soaking up snow and sleet for the past 9 hours. Wet wool weighs about triple what dry wool does, and right now your cloak is basically a wearable swamp that's clinging to your shoulders and dripping slowly onto the stone floor. Here's the problem. Water conducts heat away from your body about 25 times faster than air does. So every second you stay in these wet clothes, you're hemorrhaging body heat at a catastrophic rate. But taking them off presents its own nightmare scenario. The moment you peel off that wet wool, you're going to be standing in a stone room that's maybe 40 degrees Fahrenheit, wearing just a damp linen shirt that's now exposed to the full force of the drafts coming through your window shutters. You'll go from cold and wet to cold and wetter, and shaking so hard you can't control your hands in about 30 seconds. And here's the thing, nobody tells you about hypothermia. You don't freeze to death gradually and peacefully. First you shiver violently, uncontrollably, your muscles spasming as your body tries to generate heat through movement. Then you stop shivering, which sounds good, but actually means your core temperature has dropped so low that your body's given up on that strategy. Then comes the confusion, the slurred speech, the poor decisions, and eventually you just lie down and don't get up. You need to time this carefully. If you strip down now before getting access to any heat source, you're gambling that someone will bring those coals soon, or that you can get to the kitchen quickly enough to warm up before the cold gets too deep into your bones. If you wait too long, the wet clothing will sap so much heat that you won't have the energy to make good decisions later. Medieval messengers developed a kind of intuition about this, reading their own body's signals, knowing when they were approaching the danger zone. You're shivering now, but it's controlled voluntary almost. Your fingers are stiff but functional. Your mind is clear if thoroughly miserable. This is probably your window to act. You start with the cloak. It's held at your throat by a bronze pin, nice enough that it identifies you as someone with a little status, but not so nice that someone would murder you for it. Your fingers fumble with the pin because they're cold, and the wet wool has made everything stiff. Medieval clothing didn't have zippers or buttons in most cases. Everything was tied, pinned, or laced, which meant that getting dressed or undressed was always a production. You finally work the pin free and the cloak slides off your shoulders and hits the floor with a soggy thud that sounds like a dead fish hitting pavement. The weight relief is immediate and wonderful. The cold that rushes in to replace it is immediate and terrible. Next comes the leather jerkin. This is laced up the front with leather thongs that have swollen from the moisture and contracted into tight little knots. You're picking at these with numb fingers, cursing whoever designed this particular garment, probably cursing yourself for not maintaining your gear. Better, definitely cursing the weather and this castle and the entire feudal system that requires messengers to ride through blizzards carrying letters that probably just say something like, "Please send more wheat." Getting the jerkin off takes maybe 3 minutes that feel like 30. When it finally comes loose, you peel it off and immediately feel colder, because even wet leather provides some windbreak. Now you're down to your wool tunic and hose. The tunic is the tricky one. It's a pullover design, no buttons, you have to haul it up over your head, and wet wool clings and stretches and fights you every inch. You grab the hem and start working it upward, and your damp linen shirt comes with it, because medieval clothing likes to travel in groups apparently. You get the whole bundle up to your chest, then your armpits, and then you're stuck for a moment with your arms over your head, wrapped in cold, wet fabric, unable to see, starting to panic slightly, because you're vulnerable and blind, and this is exactly when someone would walk in, and you'd look absolutely ridiculous. One final yank and it comes free, turning inside out in the process, and you're standing there in just your linen braize medieval underpants basically, and nothing else. The cold hits you like a physical blow. You actually gasp, which is embarrassing because you're alone, but your body doesn't care about dignity right now. It cares about the fact that you're a warm-blooded mammal in a 40-degree stone box and every surface floor wall ceiling air is trying to steal your heat. Your skin prickles with goosebumps so intense it's almost painful. Your testicles try to retreat into your body cavity, which is both uncomfortable and probably a smart evolutionary adaptation. your breathing goes shallow and fast. And the shivering starts in earnest now, not the voluntary kind from before, but deep whole-body shudders that make your teeth chatter and your muscles ache. You look at your pile of wet clothes on the floor and face another decision. Leave them there in a soggy heap or try to hang them up so they'll dry. Drying is definitely better long-term. You'll need these clothes tomorrow. And putting on frozen fabric at dawn sounds like a special kind of torture. But the chamber has no pegs, no hooks, nothing designed for hanging anything. Medieval rooms were weirdly bare by modern standards. If you were nobility, you'd have travelling chests with clothing, maybe a stand for armour personal servants to manage these details. As a messenger, you have a pile of wet wool and a lot of regrets about your career choices. You end up draping your tunic over the edge of your pallet, spreading it out as much as possible. The jerkin goes next to it. The cloak is too heavy and wet to drape anywhere, so it just stays on the floor, forming a dark puddle. Your wool hose you work off, they're still damp and they stick to your legs like they're glued there, and those join the pile. Now you're standing completely naked in a medieval castle chamber, and if this was summer, it might almost be pleasant in a primitive, liberating way. But it's January, and you're about 90 seconds away from being unable to stop shaking long enough to put on dry clothes, assuming you even have dry clothes, which is suddenly a very important question. Your saddlebag is in the corner. You'd carried it up yourself because you don't trust anyone with your message pouch or your personal gear. You crouch down, which makes you even colder, because now you're closer to that heat-stealing stone floor, and dig through it with numb fingers. Please let there be something dry. Please. You find a spare linen shirt. It's not completely dry, because nothing in your pack's completely dry after days of winter travel, but it's drier than what you were wearing, which is all that matters. You also find wool hose that are slightly less damp, and a wool cap that you'd forgotten about until now. No spare tunic, though. That's unfortunate. And your only cloak is currently impersonating a wet towel on the floor. You pull on the drier shirt and it's like a hug from someone who barely likes you better than nothing but not warm. The hose take forever because your hands are shaking, and medieval hose require you to tie them to your braids with points, little laces, and fine motor control is not your strength right now. The cap goes on your head and you immediately feel slightly better because you're stopping heat loss from your scalp, and even medieval people knew that keeping your head covered was important, though they thought it was about bad humours rather than thermodynamics. But here's what you don't have: anything to cover your torso. No tunic, no jerkin, nothing between your shirt and the freezing air except hope and mild desperation. You look at that thin blanket on the pallet and realise it's about to become your only defence against the night. You're hovering near the great hall entrance, trying to look purposeful, rather than desperate, when the basic mathematics of medieval heating become impossible to ignore. That fireplace, the one that's doing absolutely nothing for you from 30 feet away, is the social and thermal centre of the entire castle, and access to it is governed by rules more rigid than anything written in law books. If you charted the temperature gradient in this hall, it would look like a heat map of the feudal system itself, scorching privilege at the top, descending through layers of moderate comfort, mild warmth, tolerance, and finally arriving at you shivering in the doorway. The Lord sits closest to the fire naturally. His chair, calling it a throne, would be excessive, but it's definitely more than furniture is positioned maybe 6 feet from the hearth, close enough that the heat probably feels oppressive after an hour. He's not even looking at the flames. He's in conversation with a visiting knight about something that requires serious facial expressions and occasional hand gestures. Next to him, his wife occupies a similarly privileged position, and she's actually holding her hands out toward the fire, which suggests she's either cold, despite her furs, or just enjoying the radiance the way some people enjoy sunshine. Their children, 2 boys who look bored, and 1 girl who's watching the hall dogs with fascination, are tucked behind them, still within the prime heating zone. Moving outward from this epicenter, the household knights occupy the next ring of warmth. They're at a table that's angled to catch heat while still being respectfully distant from the Lord's position. Maybe 10 feet from the fire, which is still excellent. These men are the Lord's military backbone. They've sworn oaths they train in his yard, they'll die for him if necessary, so they get treated well. They're not sweating, but they've removed their outer layers and are sitting in just tunics, and some have even rolled up their sleeves, which is basically medieval for "I'm so warm I'm getting casual." One of them is actually complaining about the heat, asking if someone could open a shutter for air, and you want to walk over and explain to him exactly what cold feels like, but you don't because that's a good way to get thrown out. Beyond the knights sit the household servants of higher rank, the steward, the chamberlain, the marshal who manages the stables, the priest who says morning mass. They're 15 to 20 feet from the fire, which means they're getting radiant heat, but not the full blast. They're comfortable, not toasty. This is probably the ideal zone, honestly, warm enough to relax, not so hot that you're drowsy and stupid. They're eating, talking, occasionally laughing at jokes you can't hear from your position. They belong here. They've earned their spots through years of service, and they're not leaving those benches until the meal formally ends. Then comes everyone else. The lower servant soldiers who aren't on duty, craftsmen who work in the castle, a couple of travellers who had better connections than you. They're arranged around the hall's periphery, clustered in groups where they can catch some reflected heat, or at least block the wind from the doorways. Some are sitting on the rush-covered floor backs against the walls. Others are standing, shifting weight from foot to foot, trying to get circulation going. Maybe 25 feet from the fire now, and the heat reaching them is negligible. They're probably not much warmer than you are, except they've been here all evening, and their bodies have adjusted while you just came in from the cold and everything hurts. And then there's you in the doorway, not technically inside the hall at all, 35 feet from salvation, give or take. You can see the flames, they're bright and hypnotic, and if you stare at them long enough you start to imagine you can feel the heat. Though that's just your brain lying to you, because hope is sometimes more bearable than reality. Historians still argue whether medieval people conceived of heat as a substance that flowed the old caloric theory, that wouldn't be scientifically debunked until the 1800s, or just as the absence of cold. Either way, they definitely understood that fire equals warmth, and proximity to fire equals not dying. And if you weren't important enough to sit close to the fire, well, that was God's plan, and also feudalism, and you should probably just accept it. You watch a servant, different one from Agnes, walk directly toward the fire carrying a log that's almost as big as he is. The heat must be intense on his face, but he doesn't flinch. He's done this 100 times. He feeds the log into the flames, adjusts the burning wood with an iron poker, and the fire responds with a shower of sparks and a surge of brightness that briefly illuminates the entire hall. For a moment everyone's faces are lit up golden and warm-looking, and then the moment passes and shadows reclaim the corners. That servant walks away from the fire and he's glowing with retained heat like he's been blessed. He'll probably stay warm for the next 20 minutes just from that brief exposure. Meanwhile, you've been standing in this doorway for 5 minutes and you're actively getting colder. Here's what you can't do: walk over there. Just march up to that fire and warm yourself. It's not forbidden by any written rule, but it's absolutely forbidden by the social contract that holds this entire system together. If you, a random messenger with no standing in this household, walked past the Lord and his family and the knights, and just planted yourself in front of the fire, several things would happen. First, someone would physically remove you, probably one of those knights who'd enjoy the exercise. Second, you'd be marked as someone who doesn't understand basic hierarchy. which means you're either dangerously ignorant or dangerously arrogant, and either way you're not getting help from anyone in this castle. Third, and most practically, you'd lose your one asset, which is that you're currently beneath notice, and therefore not worth bothering. The moment you become a problem, you become everyone's problem, and medieval solutions to problems usually involved violence or expulsion or both. So you edge slightly closer, maybe 2 feet into the hall proper, still near the door, still in the shadows. You're testing boundaries, seeing if anyone cares. A couple of the lower servants glance at you, assess that you're not threatening or interesting, and go back to their conversations. The dogs notice you before most humans do. There are 5 or 6 of them sprawled near the fire. Big hunting hounds and a couple of smaller terrier types, and one of them a greyhound, with a scarred ear, lifts its head and watches you with that unblinking canine stare that's calculating whether you're food threat or irrelevant. You avoid eye contact because medieval dogs were working animals that could be aggressive, and the last thing you need is to get bitten by a lord's favourite hunting dog and have that become a whole diplomatic incident. The temperature difference between where you're standing now and where you were 30 seconds ago is maybe 2 degrees. Not nothing, but not nearly enough. Your body's still in crisis mode, you're shivering despite wearing that slightly drier shirt, and your feet in their damp boots feel like they belong to someone else, someone who made terrible life choices that led to them standing in a cold castle hall, hoping for scraps of warmth. You start doing what medieval people did constantly in winter, small movements to generate heat, flexing your toes inside your boots, tensing and relaxing your leg muscles, crossing your arms tight across your chest and hugging yourself. It helps minimally the same way bailing water out of a sinking boat helps you addressing the symptom without fixing the cause. A burst of laughter from the knight's table. Someone told a joke, probably crude, and now they're all grinning and slapping the table and reaching for their ale cups. The lord smiles indulgently. He's pretending he didn't hear it, maintaining that noble dignity, while also being human enough to enjoy his men's camaraderie. His wife is less amused. She's saying something to one of her ladies-in-waiting, probably commentary about men being children. It's a scene of warmth, social warmth, physical warmth, the warmth of belonging somewhere and knowing you're safe. And you're watching it like you're watching through a window, which in a way you are. The doorway is your window and you're the person outside in the cold looking in at the life you'll never have. You need to get to those kitchens. Standing here is achieving nothing except making you more aware of how much you don't belong. But moving means giving up even this marginal proximity to the fire, and there's something psychologically difficult about walking away from heat. Even heat you're not really receiving. It's like your lizard brain is convinced that if you just wait long enough somehow, that warmth will reach you, even though your rational brain knows that's nonsense. You make the decision to move toward the kitchens, but first you need to navigate the Great Hall's social geography without causing offence or drawing attention, which is harder than it sounds when you're a shivering outsider who looks like you lost a fight with the snowdrift. The hall is maybe 60 feet long and 30 wide, with the high table at one end and the entrance you're hovering near at the other. To get to the kitchens, you need to skirt along the wall past the lower tables, where servants and soldiers are still finishing their evening meal, past the dogs, past people who might question your presence, and through a door that leads to the service areas. You start moving, keeping close to the wall, trying to project, I belong here and I'm on an errand, rather than I'm desperately seeking warmth and might steal food. The floor is covered in rushes, dried grasses and reeds that are supposed to absorb spills and provide some insulation, though mostly they just get dirty and smell like a combination of dog urine spilled ale, and that general medieval mustiness that comes from organic material slowly decomposing in a damp environment. Your boots make soft, crunching sounds as you walk, and you're hyper-aware of every noise you make because drawing attention feels dangerous right now. A soldier at one of the lower tables glances up as you pass. He's maybe 30, weathered face, the kind of guy who's seen enough combat that he doesn't get excited about much anymore. His eyes track you for a moment, assess that you're not carrying weapons or moving aggressively, and then he goes back to his bread and stew. That's the beauty of medieval castle life. Everyone's so focused on their own survival and hierarchy that unless you're actively causing problems, you're basically invisible. You're furniture that moves. The serving staff has it worse. They're not just invisible, they're expected to anticipate needs and appear exactly when required, and then vanish again, all while being completely ignored as humans. You pass by one of those dogs, the grey hound, who was watching you earlier, and it shifts position slightly, not standing but definitely alert. Its nose is working, processing your scent, cataloguing you for future reference. Medieval hunting dogs were incredibly valuable, sometimes worth more than horses, and they were trained to be protective of their territory. This one seems to decide you're not worth the energy of barking, which is a relief, because if you'd set off the dogs, every human in the hall would have turned to look and your anonymous passage would have become a spectacle. The kitchen door is ahead, you can tell by the sounds coming from it. Clattering of pots, voices calling instructions, the specific rhythm of people working in coordinated chaos. You reach the doorway and pause, because walking into a medieval kitchen uninvited is a bit like walking into a professional kitchen today. You can get away with it if you're confident and look like you have a reason to be there, but if you hesitate or seem lost, someone will yell at you. You take a breath, square your shoulders as much as you can while shivering and step through. The warmth hits you like a wall. It's not the radiant heat of the great hall's fireplace that only reaches the chosen few. It's the accumulated heat of multiple cooking fires, ovens, and dozens of bodies working in a space that's maybe 30 feet square. The temperature is probably a solid 20 degrees warmer than the hall, and compared to your chamber upstairs, it feels like walking into summer. Your body responds immediately, the shivering intensifies for a moment. Paradoxically, because sudden warmth after extreme cold triggers stronger muscle contractions as your system tries to regulate. Then it starts to ease and you can feel blood returning to your fingers and face that painful tingling sensation that means your capillaries are opening up again. The kitchen is controlled chaos. There are at least a dozen people working. Cooks, assistant cooks, scullery maids, boys turning spits, someone kneading dough at a table, someone else chopping onions with the kind of knife work that speaks to decades of practice. The main hearth dominates one wall. It's massive, maybe 8 feet across, with multiple fires burning at different temperatures for different purposes. One section has a spit where some kind of bird, maybe a goose, is roasting, fat dripping into a pan below. Another section has iron pots hanging on chains, bubbling with what smells like pottage, that eternal medieval stew that's basically whatever we have boiled together until it's edible. Against another wall are the oven's clay structures built into the masonry used for baking bread. A boy who can't be older than 10 is using a long-handled peel to pull loaves out, and the smell is intoxicating fresh bread with that yeasty, crusty aroma that's probably been making humans weak in the knees since we figured out agriculture. There are work tables covered in flour, chopped vegetables, plucked chickens, fish, that still have heads on bundles of herbs hanging from ceiling beams, wheels of cheese, baskets of root vegetables covered in dirt. 'Cause medieval refrigeration was keep it cool and dry and hope nothing rots too fast. Nobody's noticed you yet, or if they have, they're too busy to care. You scan the room looking for Marjorie Agnes said to ask for her, and you have no idea who that is. Could be the older woman stirring one of the pots with a wooden spoon the size of a small club. Could be the sharp-faced cook who's barking orders at two girls cleaning fish. Could be literally anyone. You catch the eye of one of the younger servants, a girl maybe 14, with flour on her face and exhaustion in her eyes, and you use your most polite voice to ask for Marjorie. She points without speaking. Medieval servants learned early that words cost energy, and energy was precious toward the woman with the large spoon. You approach carefully, waiting for a break in her stirring rhythm, and when she glances your way, you explain that Agnes from the hall sent you, that you're a messenger who rode in tonight, and you are told maybe you could warm up here for a bit. You're not begging, you're not demanding, you're just presenting information and hoping the universe will be kind. Marjorie looks you over with the practiced assessment of someone who's spent 40 years managing a castle kitchen and can tell everything about a person from their boots and bearing. She sees youngish male, decent clothes, but soaked, not nobility, probably legitimate given that you made it this far into the castle. She also sees someone who's genuinely cold rather than faking it for sympathy. You're still shivering slightly, and your lips probably have that bluish tinge that comes from sustained exposure to cold. She makes a decision, nods once, and tells you that you can sit over there. She gestures to a corner near one of the ovens, but stay out of the way. Don't touch anything, and if the steward comes through, you'll need to make yourself scarce, because she's not getting in trouble for harbouring strays. You thank her with genuine gratitude and move to the indicated corner. There's a low stool there, probably used by whoever tends the ovens, and you sit down with your back against the warm stone. The heat from the oven radiates through the masonry into your spine, and it's genuinely one of the best physical sensations you've experienced in days. Your muscles start to unknot. Your jaw, which had been clenched tight against chattering teeth, relaxes. You can feel your core temperature beginning to climb back towards something approaching normal. The shivering doesn't stop immediately, your body's still working through the backlog of cold, but it's getting less violent, more like tremors than full convulsions. From this vantage point you can watch the kitchen work, and it's fascinating in its own way. Medieval cooking was labour-intensive beyond anything modern people can really comprehend. Every meal represented hours of hauling water, chopping firewood, maintaining fires at precise temperatures, butchering animals, grinding spices, and coordinating timing so that everything finished simultaneously. The staff moved with practiced efficiency, each person knowing their role, occasionally calling out to each other, but mostly working in that synchronized quiet that comes from doing the same tasks together for years. A boy brings in more firewood, he's carrying what looks like half a tree, and he can't be more than 12, but apparently child labour laws weren't a medieval concern. He feeds logs into the hearth, careful not to disturb the cooking pots, and the fire responds with renewed vigour. More heat, more light, more of that primal comfort that humans have been seeking around fires since we figured out how to make them. You're finally starting to feel almost human again. Marjorie eventually notices that you've been sitting in her corner for maybe 20 minutes warming up, but also looking like you're still half frozen and possibly pathetic, and something in her softens, or maybe she just calculates that a well-fed messenger is less likely to cause problems than a desperate one. She jerks her head toward one of the work tables and tells you there's leftover pottage in the pot, and if you want some, you can help yourself to a bowl, but just one, because she's got to account for portions, and the breakfast crew will need something to eat when they start work at dawn. She says this in the tone of someone granting a favour, while also making it clear that the favour has limits and you'd better appreciate it. You stand up, your legs are stiff from sitting and from the day's riding, and from general cold-induced misery, and make your way to the indicated pot. Someone hands you a wooden bowl without comment. It's been used already tonight, maybe washed, maybe just wiped out with a rag, and medieval hygiene standards were flexible at best. You ladle out pottage, and it's thick and greyish-brown and studded with chunks of things you can't immediately identify in the dim light. Could be turnips, could be onions, could be meat scraps though. Meat in medieval peasant cooking often meant the parts nobles wouldn't eat, so you're probably looking at organ meat or gristly bits that required hours of boiling to become chewable. You take your bowl back to your corner and sit down, and the warmth of the bowl in your hands is almost as good as the food itself. Your fingers wrap around the wood, absorbing heat, and you can feel sensation returning to your fingertips, that pins and needles feeling that's painful but also reassuring because it means your extremities aren't actually frostbitten, just extremely cold. You lift the bowl to your face and inhale. The smell is, well, it's powerful. Onions, definitely some kind of herb that might be thyme or might just be generic medieval herb. The earthy smell of root vegetables, and underneath it all that slightly funky aroma of meat that's been boiled for so long it's surrendered all its flavour to the broth. The first spoonful is scalding hot because medieval people didn't have any concept of let it cool down. Food was either hot or cold, and hot was better because cold meant it had been sitting around and might be starting to spoil. You blow on the spoon, which helps minimally, and then you eat it anyway because your body needs fuel more than your tongue needs comfort. The taste is fine. It's not good by modern standards, but it's hot, and its calories and your stomach, which has been empty since this morning's hard bread and cheese, receives it with gratitude. There's salt, which is significant. Salt was expensive, and its presence meant this kitchen had resources. There's definitely onion, and what you think might be turnip, and yes, that's organ meat, probably liver or kidney, based on the texture and the slightly metallic taste. You eat slowly, partially because the pottage is hot, and partially because medieval etiquette around eating, even informal eating in a kitchen, suggested that wolfing down food made you look desperate and possibly untrustworthy. Desperate people did desperate things. You wanted to project grateful but controlled, hungry but not starving, someone who deserves kindness but won't abuse it. Each spoonful warms you from the inside, and you can feel your core temperature rising your body, diverting resources from emergency survival mode back toward normal operations. Your thinking gets clearer. The fog that had been settling over your brain, early hypothermia's gift, starts to lift. Across the kitchen, you watch the staff continue their work, and it strikes you that these people have been on their feet since before dawn, and will be until well after the household goes to sleep. The kitchen never really stops in a medieval castle. There's always something being prepared for the next meal. Always bread rising, always stock simmering, always someone monitoring fires, or washing pots or plucking fowl. These servants live in a perpetual state of motion, and their reward is that they're warm and they're fed, not well fed necessarily, but fed consistently, which in medieval terms was a form of wealth. The pottage you're eating is probably better than what a peasant in the village gets most nights. That thought sits uncomfortably. You're a messenger, which makes you working class but mobile skilled in a way that illiterate peasants aren't. You can read and write, which is rare. You know roads and have seen multiple towns and castles. But you're also profoundly vulnerable. One bad fall from your horse, one lord who decides you're not important enough to pay one winter that's too harsh, and you could end up begging or dead. The kitchen staff at least have stability. They have a roof heat food. It's not freedom, but it's security, and in 1342, security might be more valuable than freedom. You finish the pottage and consider asking for bread. You saw those fresh loaves coming out of the oven, but decide that would be pushing your luck. Marjorie's already been generous by medieval standards, which are not generous standards. You stand up, bring your bowl to the washing area, where a girl is scrubbing dishes in a wooden trough of water that's probably been used for 40 other dishes already, and you set it down with a nod of thanks. She doesn't acknowledge, you just adds it to her pile. You're already forgotten. You approach Marjorie again this time to thank her properly, and also to fish for information about your sleeping situation. You phrase it carefully. You're wondering if anyone mentioned bringing coals up to the second floor because you'd hate to bother anyone, but it's quite cold up there, and you need to be functional tomorrow for the ride to your next destination. She gives you a look that's half sympathy, half welcome to medieval life, kid. She tells you that the fuel situation is tight right now, that the steward is rationing supplies, and honestly your best bet might be to sleep down here in the kitchen for a few hours if you want to stay warm. Plenty of travellers do it. She won't stop you as long as you're gone before the breakfast rush starts around 4 in the morning. This is a gift, and you recognise it immediately. Sleeping in the kitchen means warmth, consistent, reliable warmth, from fires that will be banked but not extinguished, from ovens that retain heat for hours, from the general thermal mass of a room that's been hot all day and won't cool down quickly. It also means relative safety kitchens are communal spaces where several people are always around, so you're less likely to get robbed or harassed. The downside is that you'll be sleeping on the floor, possibly near the hearth, where people will step over you when they start work and you'll be woken up brutally early. But compared to that freezing chamber upstairs with no coal and inadequate blankets, this is luxury. You accept the offer with appropriate gratitude and Marjorie waves you off. She's got work to do, and you're taking up her attention. You scout out a spot near the ovens, but not directly in anyone's path. There's a section of floor that's relatively clean by medieval standards, meaning it hasn't had food spilled on it recently and doesn't appear to have rats actively living there. The stone is warm under your hand when you test it. Heat conducted from the ovens has made the floor actually pleasant to touch, which is remarkable considering that every other floor in this castle feels like touching ice. You don't have your blanket from upstairs, but someone probably taking pity on you, or possibly just being practical about having a person sleeping in their workspace, tosses you a couple of empty flour sacks. Their rough burlap's stiff with old flour dust, and they smell like grain and mildew, but they're better than nothing. You fold one to make a pillow of sorts, and drape the other over yourself. It's not adequate covering by any measure, but combined with the floor's warmth and the residual heat in the kitchen air, it might actually work. You lie down, positioning yourself on your side with your back to the ovens to maximize heat absorption. Your message pouch is tucked under your makeshift pillow because you're not stupid. That's your entire reason for being here, and losing those letters would end your career, and possibly your life, depending on what they contain and who sent them. The kitchen noise continues around you. Low voices, the occasional clank of a pot, the ever-present crackle of fire, someone's rhythmic chopping of vegetables for tomorrow's meals. It's not quiet, but it's not threatening either. It's the sound of life continuing, of work being done, of humans maintaining the systems that keep everyone fed and functioning. Your body starts to relax in stages. First, your muscles unclench. You'd been tensed against the cold for hours without fully realizing it, and now that tension bleeds away. Then your breathing deepens, slows. Your shivering finally stops completely. You're not warm exactly, but you're no longer actively cold, which is close enough to comfort that your exhausted brain decides to accept it. The riding, the cold, the stress, the near hypothermia, the pottage sitting heavy in your stomach, all of it combines into profound fatigue. You're drifting in that space between waking and sleeping when your professional paranoia kicks in and reminds you that you're a messenger, which means you're carrying more than just letters. You're carrying the psychological weight of being perpetually suspicious about your gear, your safety, and whether you'll wake up with everything you started with. Your saddlebag is still upstairs in that frozen chamber, along with your wet clothes, and while there's nothing in it valuable enough to steal except maybe your spare hose and a few personal items, the principle bothers you. Medieval travellers learned to sleep light and wake fast because theft wasn't just common, it was essentially a parallel economy. But going back up to get it means leaving this warmth, climbing those stairs, entering that icebox of a room, gathering your things and coming back down, all while trying not to draw attention from castle guards who might wonder why you're wandering around at night. You make the calculation your saddlebag contains some clothing, a whetstone for your eating knife, a small religious medal your mother gave you. That's probably brass, but she swore was silver, and a spare pair of leather gloves that are already stiff with age and weather. Total value may be enough to buy 3 chickens. Meanwhile, your message pouch is under your head right now, and that's what actually matters. The letters, the seals, the proof that you're employed and legitimate, that's your life. You decide the saddlebag can wait until morning. If someone steals your spare hose that's annoying but not catastrophic, you'll retrieve it at dawn before you leave, assuming you wake up in time, assuming no one's taken it, assuming a lot of things that medieval life taught you not to assume. But right now, warmth trumps possessions, and that's a calculation every traveller makes constantly: what's worth protecting versus what's worth sacrificing for comfort or safety or sleep. The thing about sleeping in medieval spaces is that you're never truly alone. Even now in the kitchen there are people moving around, the night staff who maintain fires and prepare ingredients for tomorrow's early baking. You can hear low conversations in the corner, 2 women talking about someone's pregnancy complications, discussing herbal remedies, and whether the midwife is any good. Medieval life was profoundly communal, in ways modern people would find claustrophobic. Privacy was a luxury reserved for the very wealthy, and even then it was limited. Everyone else lived, worked, ate, slept, gave birth and died surrounded by other people. You've got your eating knife on your belt, a basic tool that every traveller carried useful for cutting. Food cutting, rope cutting, whatever needed cutting. And in extreme circumstances for defence, though, it's not really a weapon. It's maybe 4 inches of iron blade with a wooden handle, kept reasonably sharp because a dull knife is dangerous and inefficient. You keep one hand near it, not because you expect trouble, but because sleeping without knowing where your knife is feels wrong. Medieval people were armed casually and constantly, not with swords, which were expensive and restricted largely to nobility and professional soldiers, but with knives, staffs, small axes, whatever tools doubled as potential weapons. Your other hand stays near your message pouch. This is messenger paranoia at its finest, even half asleep. Even in a relatively safe environment, you maintain contact with the thing that justifies your existence. Inside that leather pouch are maybe 4 letters, each one sealed with wax that's been stamped with someone's signet ring. You don't know what they say because reading clients' mail is an excellent way to get fired or killed or both. You just know they're important enough that someone paid you to carry them through a January blizzard, and that means they're important enough to guard with your life, or at least with your night's sleep. The kitchen's warmth is doing things to your body that you hadn't anticipated. After hours of being cold, your system is flooding with relief hormones, probably endorphins, though medieval people would have described it as your humours rebalancing or your vital spirits being restored. You feel almost euphoric for a moment. That giddy lightness that comes after intense physical stress ends. Your fingers and toes are tingling as blood flow returns fully. Your face feels flushed. You're suddenly aware of how thirsty you are, not surprising given that you've been breathing cold, dry air all day, and you're now in a warm environment where you're sweating slightly under your flour sack blanket. There's a water bucket near the washing area you saw it earlier, but getting up to drink means losing your carefully achieved warmth and drawing attention to yourself. You weigh the options, dehydration versus disruption. Medieval people were chronically somewhat dehydrated anyway, clean water was unreliable. So most people drank weak ale or wine throughout the day, and the concept of drink 8 glasses of water would have seemed bizarre. You decide you can wait until morning. Your thirst isn't desperate yet just noticeable, and you've ridden full days on less hydration than this. A dog wanders into the kitchen, one of the smaller ones from the Great Hall, maybe a terrier bred for catching rats. It sniffs around the floor looking for dropped food scraps, and eventually notices you lying there. It approaches cautiously, nose working overtime, trying to decide if you're friend, foe, or furniture. You stay very still because medieval dogs were working animals with unpredictable temperaments, and getting bitten by a castle dog would be both painful and socially complicated. You'd be the outsider who provoked the animal regardless of actual circumstances. The dog completes its inspection and apparently decides you're boring. It circles twice and lies down about 3 feet from you, close enough to share space but not touching, which is basically perfect. Dogs are heat sources. A sleeping dog generates warmth, and while this terrier isn't big enough to make a huge difference, every bit helps. Also, having a dog near you provides a weird kind of security. If someone approached with ill intent, the dog would probably react not necessarily to defend you, but just because dogs notice things and make noise about them. It's like having a very small furry alarm system that requires no maintenance except occasionally existing near it. You watch the dog settle its breathing evening out almost immediately. Animals are better at this than humans. They can drop into sleep within seconds. No existential anxiety. No reviewing the day's mistakes. No worrying about tomorrow. Just tired, therefore sleep. You envy that ability. Your mind is still churning despite your body's exhaustion, running through tomorrow's route, wondering about the weather, calculating how many hours until you need to be awake and moving. Messengers develop chronic low-level anxiety because every delay, every problem, every miscalculation can cascade into disaster. The kitchen staff is thinning out now. Most of the evening work is done. The pots are scrubbed, the fires are banked to a level that will maintain heat without requiring constant attention. The bread dough is set to rise overnight. A couple of people remain, one older man who seems to be the night watchman for the fires, and a young woman who's doing some kind of detailed work at a table, maybe decorating pastries for tomorrow's noble breakfast. They're talking occasionally in low voices, the kind of comfortable conversation between people who've worked together for years and don't need to fill every silence. You close your eyes and try to will yourself towards sleep. The floor is hard under your hip despite the warm stone, and you shift position slightly, trying to find a configuration that's less uncomfortable. Medieval people slept differently than modern people. They had no concept of mattresses as we know them, no box springs or memory foam or any of that. They slept on straw pallets or, if wealthy, feather beds, but always on surfaces that were firmer than we're used to. Their bodies adapted. They didn't know anything else. You've been sleeping rough for years as a messenger, so you're more adapted than most, but it still takes conscious effort to settle into discomfort. Sleep in the Middle Ages wasn't the 8-hour unconscious block that modern people aspire to, and rarely achieve. It was something stranger, more fragmented, and in some ways more natural to human biology than what we've trained ourselves to expect. You're lying on this warm kitchen floor, and your body is trying to initiate what medieval people would have called first sleep, though they didn't really have a special name for it because it was just how sleep worked, the way breathing worked, the way hunger worked. It wasn't exceptional, it was normal. The pattern went like this. You'd sleep for 3 or 4 hours after dark, deep, heavy sleep that came from physical exhaustion, and the body surrendered to darkness. Then you'd wake up. Not groggily, not fighting consciousness, but naturally completely awake in the middle of the night. This was the watching period, or the between time, and it could last anywhere from 1 to 3 hours. During this time, people didn't fight to go back to sleep. They got up, they prayed, they talked with whoever they were, sleeping near spouses, had their most intimate conversations during this time, according to court records and personal letters that survive. People did light work, checked on animals, visited neighbours, had sex, wrote letters by candlelight, contemplated their sins and their hopes. Then when the watching period ended, they'd return to second sleep for another 3 or 4 hours until dawn. Modern sleep scientists, when they finally studied humans in conditions without artificial light, discovered this pattern re-emerges naturally. We're apparently wired for it. But medieval people didn't need scientists to tell them, they just lived it, and their entire society accommodated it. Prayer books had special prayers for the midnight waking. Legal depositions mention conversations in the first sleep versus in the second sleep, as casual time markers, the way we'd say in the morning or in the afternoon. It was universal enough that nobody thought to explain it because everyone already knew. You're approaching your first sleep now, and your body's sliding into it despite the hardness of the floor and the ambient noise of the kitchen. Your breathing slows further. Your thoughts lose their linear quality and start becoming dreamlike, not dreams yet, but that pre-dream state where logic gets fuzzy and images float past without connection. You're thinking about your horse, hoping the stable boy actually gave it hay and water. Then you're thinking about your mother's house, the one you grew up in with its thatched roof, and the way rain sounded on it. Then you're remembering a girl you knew in Gloucester who laughed at something you said, though you can't remember what you said or why it was funny. The thoughts drift like smoke. The straw pallet you didn't get to use upstairs would have been similar to what peasants slept on every night, a cloth bag, usually linen or rough wool stuffed with whatever was available and cheap. Straw was most common wheat or rye straw left over after harvest, dried and packed in. If you were slightly wealthier, you might mix in hay, which was softer. If you were poor, you might use dried grass leaves, even moss or heather, depending on your region. The filling would compress over time, which meant you'd need to fluff it regularly or add more material, and it would get damp from body moisture, which in cold weather meant you were sleeping on something that was both insufficient for warmth and actively creating humidity that would make you colder. Wealthy people had feather beds, actual feathers, usually goose or duck, packed into ticking. These were incredibly expensive and valuable enough to be listed in wills and inheritance documents. A good feather bed could cost as much as a cow, and it would last for generations if maintained properly. But even feather beds weren't like modern pillows, they were packed firm and you slept on top of them, not sinking into them. The concept of softness as comfort was different. Medieval people wanted insulation from cold floors and some cushioning, but they didn't have our modern association between soft and good sleep. Too soft might have seemed unstable, unreliable, even decadent. The kitchen floor you're on right now is actually warmer than most beds in this castle tonight. Heat rises from the ovens through the stone, and stone holds heat for hours. The flagstones under you are probably still 60 degrees, even though the ovens are being damped down, and that's warm enough that you're not losing body heat through conduction the way you would on a cold floor or thin pallet. In some ways you've lucked into the best sleeping arrangement in the entire fortress, better than the Lord's chamber, if his fireplace went out better than the knight's quarters, unless they have multiple bodies sharing warmth, definitely better than that abandoned room you were originally assigned. Your mind is doing that thing where it simultaneously shuts down and stays vigilant. Part of you is sliding toward unconsciousness, but another part, the part that's kept you alive through years of travelling, is monitoring the environment. You're aware of footsteps crossing the kitchen even though you're not fully awake. You register the dog near you shifting position, its claws clicking on stone. You notice when the voices in the corner stop, meaning those two kitchen workers have either left or fallen asleep themselves. This split consciousness is something medieval people would have been intimately familiar with. True, deep, vulnerable sleep was a luxury they could rarely afford. Historians still argue whether medieval people were more or less rested than modern people. On one hand, they worked brutal hours doing physical labour and rarely got what we'd consider adequate sleep. On the other hand, they didn't have caffeine to override their body's signals, no artificial light to disrupt circadian rhythms, no alarm clocks forcing them awake before their bodies were ready. They slept when it was dark and worked when it was light generally, with variations for season and occupation. Maybe that's healthier in some fundamental way, or maybe it's just different and we romanticize it because we're exhausted from modern schedules and think anything else must be better. You're also becoming aware of sounds outside the kitchen, the castle settling into night. Somewhere above you, footsteps on wooden floors, a door closing, a brief burst of male laughter, drunk or just tired, then silence. Wind hitting the outer walls with enough force that you can hear it through the stone, a low whooshing punctuated by occasional sharper whistles when it finds gaps around shutters or under doors. The wind is the castle's constant companion in winter, and it's malevolent in its persistence, searching for every weakness, exploiting every crack. Medieval builders tried to seal their structures, but perfection was impossible. With the materials and techniques available, there was always wind somewhere, always cold finding its way in. The fire in the main hearth pops a pocket of sap or moisture in the wood heating until it explodes, sending up sparks. You register this without opening your eyes, your sleeping brain cataloguing it as normal fire noise, not dangerous. Medieval people were incredibly attuned to fire sounds because fire was life and fire was also death. A hearth fire that burned properly was safety. A fire that got out of control could destroy the entire castle. Stone doesn't burn, but timber beams do, thatched sections do, furniture and tapestries and stored grain all do. Castle fires were catastrophic events that killed dozens and left survivors homeless and desperate. Your first sleep is claiming you, now pulling you down through layers of consciousness. The last coherent thought you have is a calculation about timing. If you sleep for 3 hours, that puts you waking around midnight, then second sleep until maybe 4, when the kitchen starts morning work, then you need to retrieve your gear, check your horse, and ride out at first light. It's a tight schedule, but manageable if nothing goes wrong. And with that thought, you slip under into the dark water of sleep, where time stops meaning anything, and your body can finally temporarily stop fighting. You wake up exactly the way medieval people woke up during their watching period. Not gradually, not confused, but immediately and completely alert, as if someone had called your name. There's no grogginess, no fight against consciousness. Your eyes open, and you're awake. The kitchen is darker now. Someone's let the fire burn down to coals, and the only light comes from those glowing embers, and maybe one tallow candle burning near where the night watchman sits. You have no idea what time it is. There are no clocks you can see, no bells have rung recently, just the general sense that several hours have passed, and you're now in the deep middle of the night. Your body feels different. The desperate cold is gone, replaced by something almost comfortable. Your muscles are stiff from the floor and from riding, but they're not trembling anymore. Your hands and feet have feeling even warmth. The dog that was sleeping near you has moved closer during your sleep. It's now pressed against your legs, and you can feel its warmth through your clothes and the flour sack blanket. Dogs are strategic about heat, and this one has apparently decided you're an acceptable radiator. You don't move, not wanting to disturb it, and also because its presence is genuinely pleasant. You lie there staring at the dark ceiling beams, and your mind does what medieval minds did during the watching period. It starts processing, reflecting, planning, worrying. You think about the letters you're carrying and wonder not for the first time what they contain. Are they diplomatic, military, business scandal? You've carried messages that probably started wars, and messages that were just one merchant asking another about wool prices, and you can never tell the difference from the outside. The seals are equally fancy, the paper equally formal. Only the consequences differ. You think about the route tomorrow there's a river crossing that's probably frozen, which could be good or bad depending on how thick the ice is. Too thin and you'll have to find the ferry, which cost money and time. Thick enough and you can just ride across, which is faster, but carries the risk of falling through if you misjudge. Medieval travel was constant risk assessment, every decision a gamble against weather terrain thieves' accidents and plain bad luck. You've heard stories of messengers who disappeared, just never arrived at their destination, never found their letters, lost to whatever fate claimed them. Sometimes it was bandits, sometimes weather. Sometimes they just rode off a cliff in the dark or got sick or made one wrong turn and ended up dying of exposure in a forest. Your stomach gurgles and you realize you're hungry again despite the pottage earlier. The human body burns fuel at a shocking rate when it's fighting cold, and you've been fighting cold for days. Medieval messengers, soldiers and travellers ate constantly when they could, because their work was physically brutal. You consumed probably 3,000 calories on riding days, maybe more, and most of it came from bread, pottage, cheese, dried meat, dense, heavy foods that kept you going. Fresh vegetables were rare in winter. Fruit was basically non-existent. Your diet was beige and brown and monotonous, but it was fuel, and fuel kept you alive. You shift position slightly, trying to ease the pressure on your hip, where bone is pressing against stone. The movement wakes the dog who lifts its head, looks at you with those reflective eyes that catch the dim firelight, and then apparently decides nothing interesting is happening, and goes back to sleep. You envy the dog's ability to do that, just immediately return to unconsciousness, without the mental churn. Human brains especially anxious. Human brains belonging to people whose livelihoods depend on successfully completing dangerous tasks don't have an off switch. You're thirsty now, genuinely thirsty, and you decide it's worth getting up to drink. You carefully extract yourself from under the flour sack, moving slowly so you don't startle the dog or draw attention from the night watchman. The cold hits you immediately when you stand, not the brutal cold from earlier, but enough that you're reminded the kitchen is only relatively warm. You pad across the stone floor in your boots, which you never took off because medieval travellers learned to sleep ready to move. Your boots are still damp, and now they're also uncomfortable in that special way where leather has shaped itself to your foot, but isn't quite dry enough to be pleasant. The water bucket is where you saw it earlier, with a ladle hanging from a hook beside it. You lift the ladle and drink, and the water is cold, not icy, but cool enough to shock your teeth. It tastes slightly of wood from the bucket and has that mineral quality that comes from well water drawn through limestone. It's not particularly clean by modern standards. There's probably microscopic life swimming in it, sediment, all kinds of things, but it's the same water everyone in the castle drinks, and your medieval immune system is used to it. You drink 3 ladles full, feeling the cold liquid hit your empty stomach and spread through your body. While you're up, you look around the kitchen with the watchfulness that never quite leaves you. The night watchman, the older man you saw earlier, is dozing in his chair near the main hearth, chin on chest, but not deeply asleep. His job is to make sure the fire doesn't die completely, and nothing catches fire, and nobody steals anything, and he's probably been doing this for 20 years and can wake instantly if needed. There's nobody else visible, though you can hear snoring from somewhere, Maybe a servant sleeping in an alcove or side room you can't see. The kitchen smells different at night. During the day, it's all active. Cooking smells, roasting meat, baking bread, boiling vegetables. Now it's cooler, older, the smell of ash and stone and fat that's congealed in pans and vegetables slowly rotting in storage barrels. It's not unpleasant exactly, just different, more honest maybe. This is what the space smells like when it's not performing its function, when it's just existing. You notice a rat moving along the base of the far wall, bold as anything, and you understand why the castle keeps all those terriers. Medieval buildings were full of vermin, rats, mice, insects, because there was no way to seal them out, and there was always food around. You didn't try to eliminate them, you just tried to keep their populations manageable. You're debating whether to go check on your saddlebag upstairs or just return to sleep when you hear voices in the corridor outside the kitchen. Low male voices moving closer. Your body tenses automatically because unknown variables at night are dangerous. But then you hear laughter and the particular rhythm of men who are drunk but not hostile, probably knights or soldiers coming back from late drinking. They pass by without entering, their footsteps fading down the corridor, and you relax. Just people living their lives, no threat to you. You return to your spot on the floor, settle back down, and the dog immediately reclaims its position against your legs. The flour sack goes back over you, and you lie there waiting for second sleep to take you. This middle-of-the-night waking was when medieval people did their praying traditionally because they believed this was when the veil between the earthly and divine was thinnest. You're not particularly religious. Most messengers were pragmatic about faith, believing enough to get by but not enough to be inconvenienced, but you find yourself thinking something that might be a prayer. Please let the weather hold tomorrow. Please let the ice be thick enough, or the ferry be running. Please let me deliver these letters and get paid and make it to somewhere warm. Please let me not die doing this job. It's not formal. It's not addressed to any particular saint or even to God specifically. It's just a wish thrown out into the universe by someone who's tired and cold and trying to survive. Second sleep doesn't come as easily as first sleep did. Your body's had its rest done, its initial recovery work, and now it's less desperate, more picky about conditions. You lie there feeling every irregularity in the stone floor through the thin flour sack, aware of a draught that's found its way into the kitchen, from somewhere probably under the door that leads to the outer courtyard where supplies get delivered. The draught isn't strong enough to make you truly cold, but it's present a reminder that even here, in the warmest room in the castle, winter is patient and persistent and looking for ways in. Medieval medical theory would say your humours are imbalanced right now, too much phlegm from the cold, and damp, not enough yellow bile to provide heat and energy. The solution, according to physicians who'd never ridden through a January blizzard, would be to eat warming foods like pepper and ginger, drink hot wine with spices perhaps, have someone bleed you to remove excess cold humours. None of this would actually help, but it gave people a framework for understanding why they felt terrible, which is sometimes almost as valuable as actual relief. You don't have any hot spiced wine, and you're certainly not getting bled at midnight in a castle kitchen, so you just lie there and wait for your body to decide it's tired enough to sleep again. You can hear the castle breathing around you, not metaphorically now, but literally. The wind outside is creating pressure differentials that push air through the building's corridors and chambers, and the whole structure inhales and exhales like a massive stone lung. Drafts move through doorways, up staircases, along corridors, creating currents that you can't see but can feel if you're still enough. Medieval people were intensely aware of these air movements because they carried cold, carried smoke, carried smells both pleasant and foul. They hung tapestries partially for decoration, but mostly to block drafts. They kept doors closed not for privacy, but for heat retention. Every opening was a liability. The fire in the main hearth has burned down to a bed of coals now deep red and orange, pulsing slightly, with heat occasionally sending up a small flame when a pocket of unburned wood gas ignites. The night watchman has added no new logs, which means he's letting it bank itself for the night. Come 3 or 4 in the morning, someone will rebuild it for the breakfast preparation, but for now it's just maintaining enough heat to keep the kitchen from freezing. Those coals will stay hot for hours. That's the beauty of a proper wood fire, unlike the quick-burning kindling fires that peasants made in their hovels. This is dense hardwood oak, probably, that's been burning for 12 hours and will smoulder for 12 more. You're thinking about fires and heat when you remember something your mother told you once, back when you were maybe 10 years old, and complaining about being cold. She said her grandmother, your great-grandmother, though you never met her, used to tell stories about the winter of 1258, which was apparently so brutal that people spoke of it for generations. The Thames froze solid. Livestock died in their barns. Crops failed completely, leading to famine that killed thousands. Old people and children died in their sleep from cold, even in houses with fires, even in beds with blankets. Your great-grandmother survived it as a young woman, and she never forgot it, never let anyone in her family take warmth for granted again. That story sits in your mind now, adding context to your current discomfort. You're cold, yes, but you're not dying in your sleep cold. You're uncomfortable, but you're managing. You'll survive tonight, wake up tomorrow, deliver your letters and continue existing. That's success by medieval standards. Survival is always the first goal, and everything else, comfort, happiness, prosperity, are bonuses that some people get and most people don't. You're in the middle somewhere, neither destitute nor secure, and that's probably where you'll stay for your entire life, unless you get spectacularly lucky or spectacularly unlucky. Your thoughts drift to the other people in this castle right now, all sleeping in their various states of comfort or misery. The lord and lady in their chamber, probably in an actual bed with curtains around it, to trap heat, possibly, with a brazier still burning, almost certainly warmer than anyone else in the building. Their children in smaller chambers nearby may be sharing beds for warmth, the way medieval children routinely did. The knights in their quarters, possibly 2 or 3 to a room, their bodies and their status keeping them adequately warm. The household servants in the attics or cellars, packed together like herrings in a barrel using collective body heat to survive. And then there are the truly vulnerable, the travellers who didn't get inside before the gates closed now, either dead in the snow or huddled in some village cottage if they were lucky enough to find shelter. The beggars who lived around the castle walls hoping for scraps from the kitchen, most of whom probably wouldn't survive a winter like this one. The elderly and sick who were too weak to generate enough body heat and would just quietly stop living one night, their deaths attributed to God's will, or the cold, as if those were different things. Medieval winter was a culling mechanism removing the vulnerable with efficient brutality, and everyone just accepted it as the natural order. You're not vulnerable, not exactly, but you're not safe either. You're in that middle zone where your survival depends on making good decisions, having reasonable luck, and not getting sick or injured at an inconvenient time. One bad fall tomorrow, one horse going lame, one bout of pneumonia, and you could slide from uncomfortable messenger to dying traveller, faster than you'd like to think about. That's the reality you live with constantly, the background calculation that never quite stops running. Every decision, where to sleep, what to eat, which route to take, is weighted against survival odds. The dog against your legs shifts position, and you feel its warmth more directly now. Medieval people slept with animals Routinely, dogs, cats, sometimes even goats or sheep, if it was cold enough and they had access to livestock. Body heat is body heat, and animals generate it reliably. There are records of people dying of exposure whose dogs survived by sleeping on top of them, literally using the corpse's residual warmth until help arrived. It's grim but practical, which is basically the medieval approach to everything. Sentimentality about animals was a luxury. They were tools that happened to be alive, and if those tools could keep you warm, you used them. Your eyelids are getting heavy again finally. The second sleep is approaching, creeping up on you, with that gentle insistence that's hard to resist. Your breathing is slowing your thoughts, losing their sharp edges and becoming dreamlike again. You're thinking about warmth, about summer, about a time years ago when you delivered a message to a monastery, and the monks gave you a bed in their guest house that had actual blankets, plural, multiple layers, and you slept so deeply that you woke up disoriented, not sure where you were or how you got there. That memory is pleasant enough that your brain decides to stay with it, sliding from memory into dream, and you're gone again down into second sleep. The dog pressed against you, the kitchen breathing its slow, warm breath around you, the castle holding you in its cold stone embrace while you rest before tomorrow's ride. You wake to the sound of metal on metal, a pot being moved, a knife being sharpened, the particular percussion of kitchen work beginning. Your eyes open to darkness that's not quite as dark as before. There's a suggestion of pre-dawn grey coming from somewhere, maybe through gaps around the door. Your body feels stiff and compressed, like you've been flattened by the stone floor, and when you try to sit up, your back protests with sharp complaints from muscles that spent hours in one position without proper cushioning. The dog's gone. It left at some point during your second sleep, probably when the first kitchen worker arrived and it realised more interesting things were happening. You sit up slowly, giving your body time to remember how joints work and take stock. You're alive, which is always the first checkbox. You're relatively warm, or at least not hypothermic. Your message pouch is still under where your head was. You check immediately, reflexively, and feel the familiar weight of the letters inside. Your boots are still on your feet, still damp, but less so than yesterday. Your clothes, the shirt and hose you're wearing, are wrinkled and smell like wood smoke and flour and human body, but they're functional. You've survived the night, which means you've succeeded at the most basic level. The kitchen is coming alive around you. There are at least 5 people working now, moving with the practiced efficiency of a crew that's done this routine 1,000 times. Someone's building up the main hearth fire, adding logs to last night's coals, and the flames are starting to catch and grow. Someone else is hauling water. You can hear the slosh of liquid and the strain in their breathing as they carry heavy buckets from wherever the well is to the washing area. A woman is kneading dough at one of the work tables, her arms working in that rhythmic push and fold that bakers develop, and the smell of yeast is starting to permeate the air. Nobody's paying attention to you, which is exactly what you want. You're just a piece of human furniture that appeared overnight and will disappear shortly, not worth acknowledging unless you cause problems. You fold the flour sacks you used as bedding and leave them in a neat pile against the wall. A small gesture of gratitude that won't be noticed but makes you feel slightly less like you're taking advantage of kindness. You stand stretch carefully because your back is genuinely sore and try to work out the stiffness that comes from sleeping on stone. Your next priority is getting upstairs to retrieve your saddlebag and your wet clothes before you leave. The thought of going back into those cold corridors, up those stairs, into that freezing chamber, makes you want to stay in the kitchen forever, but you don't have that option. Messengers are itinerant by definition. You keep moving or you stop being employed. You make your way to the door, and as you're leaving, Marjorie, the cook who let you stay, catches your eye and gives you the smallest nod. Not quite a smile, not quite acknowledgement, Just that minimal gesture that means, "I see you, we're fine, move along." You nod back equally minimal and slip out into the corridor. The cold hits you like a wall. After hours in the warm kitchen, the corridor feels arctic, and your body immediately responds with shivering. The temperature contrast is probably 30 degrees kitchen, was maybe 65 corridor is maybe 35, and the shock of it reminds you exactly why everyone in the Middle Ages was obsessed with fires and hearths, and staying near heat sources. You move quickly, trying to generate warmth through motion, heading for the spiral staircase that leads to your assigned chamber. The castle is quiet in that pre-dawn way, where most people are still asleep but the working staff is beginning to move. You pass a servant carrying linens, probably heading to prepare the Lord's chamber for waking. You hear coughing from behind a door, someone's awake and sick, which in medieval winters was common enough that it barely registered as noteworthy. Everyone had a cough. Everyone had aches. Everyone was fighting some level of illness because nutrition was inadequate, and hygiene was minimal, and buildings were cold and damp and perfect for breeding respiratory problems. You climb the spiral staircase, your calves burning again because apparently yesterday's riding didn't fully exhaust them, and they're ready for more punishment. The stairwell is somehow colder than the corridor, like it's a chimney for cold air that's drawing frigid draughts from every opening and channeling them upward. Your breath makes clouds visible even in the dim pre-dawn light. By the time you reach the second floor, you're breathing hard and shivering constantly, and you're remembering with perfect clarity why you abandoned this chamber last night. The door to your room is still open, you never closed it, because there was nothing inside worth protecting. You step in and immediately regret every decision that led you to this moment. The chamber is brutally cold, colder than you remembered, colder than seems physically possible for an interior room. Your breath makes thick clouds. The walls have a sheen to them that you realize with some amazement is frost, actual frost, inside the building. The window shutters are rimmed with ice where moisture from warmer air below has risen, hit the cold shutters and frozen solid. Your pile of wet clothes from last night is now a pile of frozen clothes. The wool tunic has gone stiff, standing up slightly on its own like a cloth sculpture. The cloak is a solid mass of frozen wool that probably weighs 20 pounds. Your leather jerkin is rigid enough that you could stand it upright and it would stay there. For a moment you just stare at this disaster and calculate whether you can even wear any of these items, or if you'll need to ride in just your shirt and hope you don't freeze to death before reaching the next town. You pick up the tunic and try to bend it, and it cracks slightly, the frozen moisture in the wool fibres protesting the movement. This is unwearable. You can't put this on. It would be like wrapping yourself in a sheet of ice. The jerkin is similar frozen solid, useless until it thaws. The cloak might be salvageable if you can thaw it near a fire, but that would take time you don't have. Your saddlebag is where you left it, and when you check inside, everything's fine, the contents weren't wet enough to freeze, and the bag itself provided some insulation. You're facing a real problem now. You rode in yesterday wearing that tunic and jerkin and cloak, and now you can't wear them, which means you'll be riding out in just a linen shirt and wool hose unless you can find alternatives. Medieval messengers didn't have extensive wardrobes you owned what you could carry, and if you lost or damaged your clothes, replacing them was expensive and difficult. You look around the chamber desperately as if spare clothing might materialize, but of course there's nothing. This room is empty except for that sad pallet and your frozen garments, and the mockery of a brazier that never got its coals. You make a decision you'll take the saddlebag, leave the frozen clothes and deal with the consequences. Maybe you can buy or barter for a replacement tunic at your next stop. Maybe the sun will come out and riding will be tolerable in shirt sleeves if you move fast enough to stay warm. Maybe you'll just suffer, which is honestly the most likely outcome because medieval life was largely about accepting suffering and continuing to function anyway. You hoist the saddlebag over your shoulder. It's not heavy, maybe 15 pounds, and take one last look at this chamber that nearly killed you. You're heading back down the spiral staircase, saddlebag over your shoulder, when you hear the chapel bell ringing for Lauds, the pre-dawn prayer service that marks the beginning of the religious day. It's maybe 4:30 in the morning, still dark outside, and the bell is calling the devout and the obligated to worship. You're neither, but the sound reminds you that you need to get moving soon if you want to leave at first light. Medieval travel was ruthlessly tied to daylight hours. You rode from dawn until dusk if you wanted to make decent time, and every minute of darkness was wasted opportunity or increased danger. You make your way toward the stables, navigating by memory, and by following the smells, horse manure, hay leather, that particular animal warmth that large mammals generate. The stable block is attached to the castle's outer buildings, accessible through a covered passage that's mercifully shorter than your journey yesterday. When you push through the stable door, you're hit with a wall of warmth that's almost shocking. Not kitchen warmth, but animal warmth, the accumulated heat of 20 horses breathing, eating, existing in an enclosed space. It's probably 50 degrees in here, which feels tropical after that frozen chamber. Your horse is in a stall near the door. You recognize it by the white blaze on its forehead and the way it turns its head when you approach. The stable boy did his job. There's hay in the manger water in the bucket, and your horse looks tired but functional. You run your hand along its neck, checking for heat or swelling that might indicate injury, and find nothing alarming. Its coat is rough and thick with winter growth, and under your palm you can feel the solid warmth of horse flesh. This animal has carried you hundreds of miles over the past months, and barring disaster it'll carry you hundreds more. You don't love it exactly. Medieval people weren't sentimental about working animals, but you depend on it absolutely, and you take care of it the way you'd take care of any essential tool. Your saddle and tack are hanging on pegs near the stall, and you check them over with the paranoia that never quite leaves a travelling man. The leather is cold and slightly stiff but not damaged. The stirrups are fine. The girth strap has some wear, but it'll hold. You start the process of tacking up blanket first, then saddle cinching it carefully because a loose saddle can shift during riding and dump you onto frozen ground at speed, which is an excellent way to break bones or your neck. Your horse tolerates this with the patient resignation of an animal that's been through this routine countless times. While you're working, another traveller enters the stable, a merchant by the look of him, older, well-fed, in a way that speaks to regular meals and prosperity. He's got servants with him, 2 young men who are handling his horses and gear while he supervises. He glances at you, does the same assessment everyone does, takes in your modest gear, your lack of servants, your youth, and dismisses you as unimportant. In the medieval hierarchy, merchants outranked messengers by a considerable margin. Merchants owned property, employed people, had connections and political influence. You were hired help who happened to be mobile. He's complaining to his servants about the cold, about the quality of his accommodation last night, about the breakfast he's expecting. His voice has that particular tone of someone who's used to being obeyed and is performing his status through complaints. You ignore him and focus on your work, checking your horse's hooves for stones or cracks, making sure everything's ready for a long, cold ride. One of his servants, the younger one, maybe 18, catches your eye and gives you a look of exhausted sympathy, one working person to another. You give him a tiny nod back. The merchant doesn't notice because people like him never notice silent communication between servants. You need to get your message pouch from where you left it. You set it down when you started working on the saddle, and now you retrieve it and secure it carefully to your belt. This is your entire reason for existence. These letters and losing them would be catastrophic in ways that go beyond just losing employment. Depending on what they contain, and who sent them, losing sealed messages could get you accused of theft, espionage, or worse. The letters themselves are probably worth very little, some vellum, some wax, some ink, but the information inside them could be worth fortunes or lives or both. The stablemaster appears a grizzled man in his 50s who moves with the stiffness of someone whose joints hurt constantly from decades of physical work in cold conditions. He's making rounds, checking that travellers are being charged correctly for stabling, making sure no one's stealing anything, generally asserting authority over his domain. He stops at your stall, looks at your horse, looks at you and asks if you're settling your account. You tell him you're with the castle, delivered messages last night, and he grunts acknowledgement. Castle business means the lord's household handles payment, which means he doesn't need to extract coins from you. He moves on to harass the merchant, who definitely does owe money and is definitely going to argue about the price. You lead your horse out of the stall and toward the stable door. The animal's warm breath makes huge clouds in the cold air, and its hooves clop on the stone floor with that solid sound that's somehow reassuring. Outside the stable it's still dark, but getting lighter, that grey pre-dawn where you can see shapes but not details. The castle yard is mostly empty, just a few servants moving on early errands, smoke rising from the kitchen, chimneys guards on the walls looking bored and cold. You mount up, which in your cold, stiffened state is less graceful than you'd like. Medieval stirrups with simple metal loops, no padding, no comfort features, just functional tools to keep your feet stable while riding. You get yourself settled, adjust your saddlebag, check that your message pouch is secure, and take a moment to steel yourself for what's coming. You're about to ride out into January weather wearing just a linen shirt, wool hose, and hope. The cloak you're wearing is the one from your saddlebag, not the frozen disaster upstairs, but it's thin and inadequate, and you know you're going to be cold beyond cold before this day ends. The castle gates are opening now. You can hear the massive wooden doors being unbarred, the iron hinges creaking, the morning ritual of opening the fortress to the world. Guards are changing shifts, the night watch being replaced by day guards who look equally tired and equally cold. You ride toward the gate and one of the guards glances at you, recognizes you from last night by your horse or your face, or just the general category of messenger leaving at dawn, and waves you through without question. You pass under the gatehouse through that tunnel of stone where your horse's hooves echo, and then you're outside the castle walls back in the world. The wind hits you immediately. It's been waiting for you, and it's mean and personal and determined to find every gap in your inadequate clothing. You're shivering before you've gone 20 yards. Your hands on the reins are already going numb. Your face feels like it's being slapped repeatedly by an invisible hand made of ice. And you've got at least 30 miles to ride before you reach your next destination. Assuming the weather holds, assuming you don't get lost, assuming nothing goes wrong. The road ahead is more suggestion than reality, a track through snow that's been partially packed down by previous travellers but is filling in again with fresh powder. Dawn is breaking slowly, reluctantly, as if the sun itself is hesitant to witness another January day. The light is grey and flat, making distances hard to judge, and turning the landscape into a monochrome study of white ground, dark trees, and iron sky. Your horse plods forward with the resignation of an animal that knows this is going to be miserable, but has no choice except to endure it. Within 10 minutes of leaving the castle, you're colder than you were at any point last night. Moving through wind on horseback is completely different. From standing still in a cold room, the wind finds every thread of your linen shirt and exploits it, pulling heat away from your body, faster than you can generate it. Your thin cloak flaps uselessly, providing almost no protection, just something for the wind to play with. Your hands are gripping the reins, but you're losing fine motor control in your fingers, that dangerous numbness that means your body's prioritizing core temperature over extremities. Your face feels frozen, your nose is running, and you can't feel your ears at all. You're also hungry in a way that goes beyond normal hunger. Your body is burning calories at a desperate rate, trying to maintain temperature, and that pottage from last night is long gone. Medieval travellers learned to eat heavily before cold rides because food was literally fuel for the body's internal furnace, and right now your furnace is running on empty and demanding more input. You've got some hard bread in your saddlebag from 2 days ago, and at the next reasonable stop you'll gnaw on it. But right now you need your hands on the reins, and stopping means losing forward momentum, which is the only thing keeping you even marginally warm through movement. The landscape you're riding through is beautiful in that harsh medieval winter way that nobody had time to appreciate because they were too busy trying not to die. Snow-covered fields stretch to your right, broken by occasional hedgerows and the dark lines of stone walls. To your left, forest-bare trees making intricate patterns against the grey sky branches like black veins. The forest is dangerous territory, home to wolves, bandits, and the general lawlessness that existed in spaces between towns and castles, where no lord's authority was strong enough to maintain order. You stay on the road such as it is, even though the road makes you visible and vulnerable to anyone watching. Your horse stumbles slightly, not seriously, just a momentary loss of footing on uneven ground hidden under snow, and your body tenses automatically. A fall right now could be catastrophic. You're alone on this road wearing inadequate clothing, and if you broke a leg or your horse broke a leg, you'd be looking at death from exposure within hours, unless someone happened to pass by and decided to help rather than rob you. Medieval travel was gambling with your life on every journey, and winter travel was gambling with loaded dice. You're thinking about warmth obsessively now, the way starving people think about food. You remember the kitchen's heat, the oven-warmed floor, the way your body felt when it finally stopped shivering. You think about summer, about riding through June heat when your complaint was being too warm and sweaty. You think about tavern fires and hot meals and beds with actual blankets. These memories aren't comforting. They're torture, reminding you of what you don't have and won't have for hours. But your mind can't stop producing them, can't stop reaching for the concept of warmth, the way a drowning person reaches for air. The sun is properly up now, but it's filtered through clouds and provides no warmth whatsoever. Medieval people understood that sunlight meant warmth in summer, but was useless in winter. You could have full sun and still freeze to death because the air temperature mattered more than the light. Historians still argue whether medieval winters were genuinely colder than modern ones, or if people just perceived them as colder because they had inadequate shelter and clothing. Probably both. The Little Ice Age was beginning around this period, average temperatures dropping, growing seasons shortening, harvests failing more frequently. The world was getting colder, and people were dying because of it. You see smoke ahead, a farmhouse or cottage, some habitation with a fire. This sight triggers a powerful longing in you, a nearly overwhelming urge to ride up to that doorbell entry and huddle by their fire for an hour. But you know how this works. They'd probably let you in because medieval hospitality was a real thing, part religious obligation and part practical insurance. You helped travellers because someday you might be the traveller needing help. But you'd also be disrupting their morning, eating their food, using their warmth, and they'd resent you even as they helped you. And more importantly, it would delay you, and delay means arriving late at your destination, which means angry clients, which means possibly not getting paid or not getting hired again. So you ride past the cottage watching its smoke rise into the grey sky, imagining the family inside probably eating porridge around their hearth. Probably cold themselves, but less cold than you probably complaining about their lives while having no idea that a messenger just rode past envying their comparative comfort. Medieval life was layers of relative misery everyone suffered, but some suffered more than others, and your suffering was currently acute. Your horse needs water, and so do you. There's a stream ahead that you know crosses the road. You've travelled this route before, and assuming it's not completely frozen, you can both drink. When you reach it, you find that the stream is partially frozen, but still flowing in the centre water, moving too fast to freeze solid. You dismount, which is painful because your legs have been gripping the horse for over an hour and your muscles are stiff and cold. You lead the horse to the stream's edge, and it drinks carefully, testing the water first before committing. You kneel beside the stream. The ground is snow-covered, and the cold immediately conducts through your hose to your knees and cup your hands to drink. The water is so cold it hurts your teeth, but it's clean and you're desperately thirsty. You drink several handfuls, feeling the icy water hit your stomach and spread through your body. It doesn't warm you, if anything, it makes you colder, but dehydration is its own danger, and you need to stay functional. Medieval travellers died from all kinds of causes, but dehydration in winter was surprisingly common, because people didn't feel thirsty the way they did in summer, and by the time they realised they needed water, they were already impaired. You're back on your horse and riding, but your mind is starting to do strange things, not hallucinations exactly, but that particular mental drift that comes from cold exhaustion and sensory deprivation. The landscape is monotonous, just endless white and grey, and the rhythmic plodding of your horse and your brain is searching for stimulation, for anything to focus on besides the relentless cold. You find yourself remembering meals with unusual clarity, specific meals from months or years ago, the texture of bread, the taste of roasted chicken, the warmth of wine spreading through your chest. Food memories are visceral and detailed, and right now they're more real than the frozen road ahead. Medieval people had a complex relationship with food that went beyond mere sustenance. It was status, medicine, pleasure, and survival all mixed together. The wealthy ate meat, regularly spiced their food with expensive imports like pepper and cinnamon, drank wine from specific regions. The poor ate pottage and bread, and whatever they could grow or forage, and meat was a rare celebration. You're somewhere in the middle. You eat better than peasants when you're employed, worse than peasants when you're not. Right now you'd commit minor crimes for a bowl of hot soup and a piece of fresh bread with butter. The cold is doing something to your sense of time. Hours feel like minutes, or minutes feel like hours. You've lost the ability to judge accurately. You know you've been riding since dawn and the light suggests it's mid-morning, but whether that means 2 hours or 4 hours, you genuinely can't say. Your body has moved past the acute shivering phase and into something more dangerous, a dull, constant cold that's settled into your core, making your thinking slow and your reactions sluggish. You're approaching hypothermia's early stages where you're still functional, but less capable than you realise, and the danger is that you'll make bad decisions without recognising they're bad. You need to eat something, and you need to do it now before your judgment deteriorates further. You pull your horse to a stop. It's happy to pause, standing there breathing clouds into the cold air, and you dig through your saddlebag with hands that barely work. Your fingers are like wooden blocks, barely able to grip, and opening the bag's straps is a frustrating exercise in coaxing numb digits to perform fine motor tasks. Eventually you extract the hard bread, a chunk maybe the size of your fist, dark rye that's been baked twice so it'll keep for weeks without moulding. The bread is frozen solid. Of course it is. Everything's frozen. You try to bite it and nearly chip a tooth. It's like trying to eat wood. So you sit there on your horse holding frozen bread and you have to laugh because the absurdity of it is either funny or utterly depressing, and you're choosing funny. You tuck the bread inside your shirt against your chest, hoping your body heat will thaw it enough to be edible. Medieval travellers did this constantly, use their bodies to warm food. Dry clothes keep things from freezing. Your body was a tool, a heat source, a survival mechanism that happened to also be the thing experiencing all this misery. While you wait for the bread to thaw, you force yourself to assess your situation objectively. You're cold, dangerously cold, but not yet critically cold. You're hungry and tired, but functional. Your horse is tired, but steady. The weather is holding no new snow, just cold and wind. Your destination is maybe 15 miles ahead if your mental map is accurate, which means another 3 or 4 hours of riding at this pace. You can survive 3 or 4 more hours. You've survived worse. That winter 3 years ago when you got caught in a blizzard and had to shelter in an abandoned shepherd's hut for 2 days that was worse. The time you fell through ice crossing a stream and had to ride for 6 hours in wet clothes that was worse. This is just regular, terrible, not extraordinary terrible. The bread is softening slightly against your chest. You pull it out and manage to tear off a chunk with your teeth. It's still half frozen and incredibly dense, the kind of bread that exists purely for calories with no pretense of being enjoyable. You chew slowly because your jaw is cold and stiff, and swallowing, the bread feels like it's scraping down your throat. But it's food, and food is fuel, and fuel means your body can keep fighting. You eat half the chunk and save the rest, tucking it back into your shirt for later. Medieval wisdom said to eat small amounts frequently on cold journeys, rather than one big meal because your body needed constant fuel to maintain heat. You're about to urge your horse forward when you hear something that makes you freeze voices ahead, multiple voices, male, speaking in tones that carry aggression or at least intensity. Your hand automatically goes to your eating knife, which is a pathetic weapon, but better than nothing. The voices are getting closer, and then you see them, 3 men on foot, poorly dressed, carrying staves or clubs walking down the road toward you. They see you at the same moment you see them, and everyone stops. This is a moment of calculation that happens constantly in medieval travel. Are these men dangerous? Are they just travellers? Are they outlaws looking for someone to rob your horse and gear, mark you as someone with at least minimal wealth? You're not nobility, but you're employed mobile, and you have things worth stealing. 3 men against 1, even if you had a proper weapon, would be bad odds. Your advantage is that you're mounted and they're not, which means you can run if needed. Your disadvantage is that running means possibly losing the road, getting lost, or having your horse stumble in deep snow. You decide on a strategy confidence without aggression. You straighten in your saddle despite your exhaustion project, the bearing of someone who's legitimate and expected and not worth bothering. You nod to them, a neutral acknowledgement, neither friendly nor hostile. One of them, the oldest, maybe 40, with a scarred face and missing teeth, nods back and calls out, asking if you've seen soldiers on this road. You tell him no, you're coming from the castle, back there heading east, haven't seen anyone. He accepts this, waves his hand in dismissal or thanks or both, and the 3 of them continue past you without incident. You breathe out slowly, realizing you'd been holding tension in your entire body. Were they outlaws? Maybe. Were they just poor men looking for work or avoiding trouble? Also maybe. The reality is you'll never know, and it doesn't matter because the encounter ended without violence. Medieval roads were full of ambiguous moments like this, people who might be dangerous or might be harmless, and you navigated by instinct and luck, and the hope that appearing confident and unbothered would make people decide you weren't worth the effort. You ride on your heart rate settling back to normal, and now you're hyper-aware of your surroundings in a way you weren't before. Every shadow in the tree line could be someone waiting. Every sound could be horses approaching. Paranoia is exhausting, but it's also what keeps travellers alive, and you can't afford to relax until you reach your destination and deliver your letters and collect your payment and find somewhere warm to sleep. You wake naturally sometime before dawn, slipping out of sleep the way medieval people did, smoothly without alarm, your body telling you it's had enough rest and it's time to be conscious again. The room is darker now. The brazier has burned down to faint coals that give off minimal light but still radiate enough heat to keep the space from freezing. You lie there for a moment, orienting yourself, remembering where you are and why. The bed is still warm around you, the blankets heavy and comforting, and for these few minutes you allow yourself to simply exist in comfort, without urgency or fear or cold pressing down on you. Outside, you can hear the town beginning to wake a dog barking somewhere. Footsteps in the street below, the distant sound of someone chopping wood. Medieval morning started early because daylight was precious, and work waited for no one. Farmers would already be tending animals, bakers would be firing their ovens, servants would be hauling water and building fires. The rhythm of daily life was dictated by necessity and season, and winter mornings were particularly brutal because everything took longer in the cold and the darkness lasted longer. You sit up and your body protests, but gently you're stiff from yesterday's ride and from sleeping in one position, but it's normal stiffness, not the dangerous cold deep ache from the road. Your feet touch the wooden floor and it's cold but bearable. You dress in the semi-darkness, pulling on your hose and your shirt, both of which smell of smoke and travel, but are dry and functional. Your boots are still slightly damp, but they've dried enough overnight that they're wearable without being actively miserable. There's water in the basin, it's cold, probably near freezing, but you splash your face anyway because it wakes you fully, and the shock of it reminds you that you're alive and functional. Medieval people had morning rituals that centered around readying themselves for another day of survival. Prayer for those who were devout, washing at least minimally, checking gear and possessions, mental preparation for whatever the day would bring. You go through your own version of this, checking your message pouch, counting your coins, planning your route, running through the logistics of getting from here to your next destination. You make your way downstairs and the common room is transformed from last night's social space into morning functionality. Margaret is overseeing breakfast, simple food, bread and porridge and weak ale laid out on a side table where guests can help themselves. There are fewer people than last night, just a handful of early risers and fellow travellers who need to be on the road soon. You take a bowl of porridge. It's oat porridge, thick and bland, but filling, sweetened slightly with honey. That's probably more expensive than the oats, and you eat standing near the fire, savouring these last moments of warmth before you have to go back out into the cold. A travelling merchant is at another table, an older man with the prosperous look of someone who's been successful at trade for decades. He's eating bread and cheese and drinking heated wine, and he nods to you in that universal traveller's greeting that acknowledges shared experience without requiring conversation. Medieval travellers formed temporary communities like this, brief connections based on nothing more than being in the same place at the same time, sharing the same hardships. You'd probably never see this man again, but for this moment you're fellow survivors of the road. Margaret approaches and asks if you need anything for your journey. She can pack bread and cheese for you to carry. She can have the stable boy prepare your horse. She can give directions if you're uncertain of the route. This is good business practice. Satisfied customers return and recommend the inn to others. But it's also genuine hospitality. The medieval understanding that helping travellers was both practical and moral obligation. You accept the bread and cheese, pay a small additional fee for it, and tell her the stable boy should have your horse ready. You finish your porridge drink, the last of your ale, and gather your belongings. Your saddlebag feels lighter. Now you've consumed or used some of its contents over the past days, but it's still substantial enough to remind you that you're carrying your entire life with you. Medieval travellers were minimalists by necessity. Everything you owned had to be portable, durable, and essential. Sentimentality about possessions was a luxury you couldn't afford, when every extra pound meant more work for your horse and more weight to manage. Outside, the pre-dawn light is grey and cold, but not as brutally cold as yesterday. The sky is clear, which means the temperature will drop further once the sun is fully up. Medieval people understood that clear skies in winter meant colder days because clouds held in heat, but it also means no snow, which is worth the cold. Your horse is ready, saddled and waiting, and the stable boy has done good work. The animal looks rested and fed and ready for another day's travel. You mount up, settle into the saddle, check that everything's secure. Your message pouch is on your belt, your saddlebag's tied down properly, your new provisions are packed away. You're ready, or as ready as you'll ever be, for another day of medieval travel, with all its uncertainties and discomforts, and occasional moments of beauty. The road ahead will be cold and probably difficult, but you've survived worse, and you'll survive this too, because survival is what you do, day after day, journey after journey, until eventually you don't. You ride out of the stable yard and onto the main street, and the town is waking up fully now. Shutters, opening, smoke rising from chimneys, people emerging to begin their work. You pass the church where the bell is ringing for prime, calling the faithful to morning prayer. You pass houses where families are starting their days, children being fed, fires being built, the eternal routines of domestic life continuing regardless of cold or hardship. And then you're at the edge of town where the buildings end and the road continues into open country, and you urge your horse forward into another day. The cold is still there waiting for you like an old acquaintance, but somehow it feels less hostile this morning. Maybe it's because you're rested and fed, or maybe it's because you've proven to yourself that you can survive it. That cold is just another obstacle to navigate rather than an enemy that will definitely defeat you. The landscape around you is beautiful in its winter starkness. Bare trees making delicate patterns against the pale sky, fields of snow, stretching to distant horizons, the world simplified to essential shapes and muted colours. You're thinking about all the other messengers out there right now, riding their own routes, carrying their own letters, fighting their own battles against cold and exhaustion and uncertainty. You're thinking about the people in that castle where you nearly froze and whether they're warm now or still struggling. You're thinking about the kitchen staff who showed you kindness, and the widow Margaret who gave you shelter, and Thomas Harding who paid you fairly, and all the small acts of human decency that make survival possible in a harsh world. Medieval life was brutal in ways modern people struggle to comprehend: the cold, the hunger, the disease, the violence, the uncertainty, the constant proximity to death. But it was also human, full of people trying their best, showing kindness when they could, building communities and connections that helped everyone survive a little longer. You're part of that now, one small piece, in a vast network of travellers and workers and survivors, all of you, just trying to make it through another winter, another day, another night. The sun is rising properly now, painting the snow with shades of pink and gold, and despite the cold and the long ride ahead, you feel something almost like contentment. You've got work, you've got your health, you've got a horse under you and a road ahead. That's enough. In the Middle Ages, that was always enough, just the promise of another day, the possibility of warmth and food and safety at the end of it, the knowledge that you'd survived this far, and might survive a little farther. You ride on into the morning, into the cold, into whatever comes next. And so, another messenger's journey continues mile by frozen mile, through a medieval world that never promised comfort, only the chance to survive if you were tough enough and lucky enough and careful enough. The castle you left behind is just a memory now. Those stone walls, that kitchen floor, that moment of desperate cold when you weren't sure you'd make it through the night. But you did make it. You always do somehow until the day you don't. That's the truth about medieval survival. It was temporary. Always. Temporary, just borrowed time between disasters. But in those borrowed hours there was warmth sometimes, and food, and the kindness of strangers who understood what it meant to be cold and far from home. There were fires that pushed back darkness, and blankets that held off winter for a few hours, and the simple satisfaction of delivering your letters and earning your coins and knowing you'd done your job well. Sleep comes easier now when you think about those nights, not because they weren't hard, but because they remind you that humans have always found ways to survive impossible things. We've always huddled together against the cold, shared our warmth and our food and our fires. We've always told stories to pass the dark hours, always hoped for dawn, always believed that morning would eventually come. So rest now here in your warm bed, with your modern heating and your soft pillows, and all the comfort that centuries of human progress have built for you. Rest and be grateful, and remember sometimes that cold was real, and those messengers were real, and they survived so that eventually, someday, you could be born into a world where freezing to death in your sleep is no longer an everyday fear. The fire burns low. The story ends. The messenger rides on through your dreams carrying letters you'll never read to destinations you'll never see, surviving through another medieval winter that exists now only in imagination and history and the quiet spaces between sleeping and waking. The story ends here. See you in the next video. Good night.